Welcome into the Backroads Bill Podcast. I'm Ben, and happy New Year's Eve. If you're watching this the day of release, it is New Year's Eve and the final episode of 2025. It has been a wild year. We've had some absolutely amazing guests on that really started right from January onwards. So we've been very blessed to have a lot of great guests that have come on. A lot of great guests still lined up for 2026. A couple of episodes that we've already recorded, including Project Grizzly. And that's all I'm going to say. If you know what that word is, you'll know what it means. So we have some really cool guests. I think Bill might have said something about that in our New Year's Eve episode. Oh, not Bill, sorry, Santa. I think Santa said something about that in our New Year's. I let the cat out of the bag. Anyways, all right. So we are proud on this episode today. Our guest has some attachment to an episode we actually did earlier on in December, which was the re-greening of Sudbury. We had Peter Beckett and Sarah Woods on from the VTAC, both part of the VTAC committee, talking about the re-greening, talking about the reclamation that's been going on for decades there in Sudbury. And today we brought on Dr. John Gunn, who is also a piece of that, and also really good friends with Jane Goodall, who unfortunately passed away recently, but was obviously, everybody knows who she was, a huge part of the environment of anthropology. I'm pretty sure everybody at some point has either seen or knows who she is. And she had a very personal connection to Sudbury. She was able to really have a hand in the environment and the reclamation of Sudbury as well. And of course, the really famous IMAX movie that was made about her that was at Science North. We get into all this really cool stuff with Dr. John Gunn, and we talk about the impact on Sudbury, of course, of the devastation that happened a little bit. That bleeds into a little bit of the re-greening episode, and just some of the really interesting ways that Jane Goodall was impacted us here in kind of a small, in relative scope of stuff, kind of a small place in Ontario, which is kind of neat. So all of that on the way, but first we do need to thank our title sponsor, Source for Sports. It's almost that time of year. Early mornings at the rink, fresh notebooks and backpacks, and a community gearing up for another great season of varsity sports. At Source for Sports North Bay, we're proud to be part of it all. Whether it's finding your kid's first pair of skates, gearing up for tryouts, or outfitting your team for the season ahead, we've got you covered. Because here, we're not just a sports store, we're neighbors, coaches, teammates, and fans. And we're proud to cheer you on every shift, step, and stride of the way. Visit Source for Sports North Bay at 1321 Fisher Street and let us help you along your way. So today we are pleased to be joined with John Gunn, who is a professor emeritus at Laurentian. John, you were describing beforehand what you did exactly, and I want to let you tell the audience, because there were a couple of titles there, because you weren't necessarily in the classroom. You were on the Canadian Research Chair, I believe. So first of all, welcome to the program, and maybe if you can give us a little bit of what exactly you did at Laurentian.
Yes, thanks. I actually started at Laurentian in 1989 as a government scientist and created the first co-op unit for resource management and the longest still running, called the Cooperative Freshwater Ecology Unit. And that began in 1989 and kind of brought science for public policy to the university, and in the issues particularly related to acid rain damage and how we're going to deal with it. And then I remained a government scientist until 2003, when I switched over and joined the university as a Canada Research Chair in stressed aquatic systems, and continued in that role till last year.
Yeah, and we talked about we had Peter Beckett on and Sarah as well. I can't remember, VTEC, I believe, was the board that they were on, Bill, but
they still are, yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about the re-greening of Sudbury, talking about the acid rain and stuff that happened there. But Bill, I know that you always love to do your introductions, so why don't you introduce the audience a little bit to John?
Yeah, Dr. John Gunn, a storied career, because we are going to get around, Ben, to talk about the Valley Living with Lake Center, and that's John's baby, along with a number of other people, but that's lifelong work. But to start off, Jane Goodall passed this past October at the age of 91. She was a primatologist, world-renowned with her study with wild chimpanzees, and she took it upon herself. I don't know, and John will have a story about this. That Jane's exact quote, which she says, providing that an environment was totally destroyed can be cleaned up and become beautiful again. She's speaking of the world-class study of Sudbury, the regreening study, and we've talked about that in other podcasts before. And because Jane has passed, but I know John has has stories and links to Jane, and I'd like to start off by saying, and from my research, Jane was here in 2021, 2022, and 2023 for various events in Sudbury. But it must go back before then, John, with your connection with Jane Goodall.
Yeah, no, I actually can say we were friends, and what an honor to be able to say. She had a long association with Sudbury, and she loved Sudbury because it was such a dramatic story to tell. She came in 1996. Now, well, so it will be 30 years ago, and I think she discovered the story of Sudbury at that time, which she took as her job to spread around the world. It had only been 4 years since Sudbury was recognized with the Earth Summit Award for the regreening program, and we had just completed the Peregrine Falcon release program, and Jane came to give her lecture, and she met the filmmaker, David Lickley, on that day. I attended the presentation, but I didn't really get to know her till a few years later. And she was enthralled with the power of the story, how such a devastated landscape would be winning Earth Summit Awards for regreening. She, of course, is and was and so proud to be the UN Messenger of Peace. And she viewed peace and the environment all in one phrase, that there can't be one without the other. And she saw on that particular day, I wish I could get a picture of it. I can't find the picture, but the Falconbridge lectures that supported her first trip there, it also supported dignitaries like Margaret Atwood and Jesse Jackson and Linus Pauling. And Jane was supported by the trip by Falconbridge, and they, with their namesake, had been funding the Falcon Release Program to bring back the endangered peregrine after DDT damage. And that was happening a few years later from the top of the married student quarters at Laurentian. So she was given a gift of a feather from the peregrine as a symbol of hope, and she carried that feather around the world to tell the hard rock mining story, that even any other devastated location can do what Sudbury was attempting to do. So that's when it began. And then after that first film that David produced, she was coming back to Sudbury in 2002, and that's when I really started to get to know her.
Yeah, that movie, and again, an early IMAX production, and then of course she was there for 2021 with the opening of the Laurentian University Garden, and then subsequently the next year, the 10 millionth tree, which was a national, if not an international news story. But take us through those events as well.
No, I have to jump in and correct some of your dates there, Bill, because she came back after the Jane Goodall Gombe show in 2002. And on that year opened the Jane Goodall Reclamation Trail out of the Trans-Canada Highway. And then had the privilege of participating in the recovery of Junction Creek by symbolically releasing a big brook trout into it with the politicians and others standing around. And she was a feisty activist, and she saw that her presence there with such an unlikely example in front of her, taking one of the dirtiest and most devastated waterways, draining 3 or 4 mine sites and sewage and industrial effluents of all sort, and dreaming of having it as a brook trout stream. So she was all for it. She and I met that morning, and I realized she wasn't as good at catching fish in a bucket as she was meeting a chimpanzee with a hand. But she released a fish just behind the Ukrainian Center in downtown Sudbury with all the politicians and media. And she pretty well told us that your job is now. Let's clean this thing up. And that 25 years later, now we have brook trout being released every year, a huge trout festival. This will be the 25th anniversary. And 20 species of fish now living in a amazingly cleaned up system with 2 million trees planted and a wonderful award-winning environmental group called the the Junction Creek Stewardship Committee. So Jane, in her writing about Sudbury, often referred to the trout as there was an interview in a podcast between Margaret Atwood and Jane where she bragged about that she basically had started the cleanup program for Junction Creek now 25 years ago.
It's funny when we talk about one of the concepts of it's a lot hard. It's easier to destroy something than it is to make something, whether it's a man-made structure or if it's the environment. And obviously, with you coming from a aquatic-based background, when you think about like how quickly humans damage the ecosystem there, like the waterways, how long does that take? And I know it's probably still an ongoing, but the years and years of damage it did, how long does it take for that waterway to become viable again and to become what it was prior to the damage?
Well, I've been at it getting close to 50 years, but I started in 1978, and I don't think in our early writings and words we would have believed in one lifetime we would have had the amazing recovery of water quality and fish populations in Sudbury that we have today. At that time, we were unfortunately using terms like dead lake, which got us in trouble sometimes, that you can't protect a corpse in that case. And but today, with an enormous investment, and we have to thank industry and government for that, is more than $3 billion has been spent on the smelter cleanups in Sudbury. And nothing would have been able to happen in regreening or lake recovery if we didn't first clean up the atmosphere and contaminants coming in. So when 98% of the pollution was brought out of the largest point source of sulfur pollution on Earth, Sudbury was famous for being the worst. Nature did surprise us in less than 50 years. Many of those lakes are now back, and much of the biodiversity has been returned. More than half of my treasured lake trout lakes that were lost are now back and reproducing.
When you talk about biodiversity, when we think of lakes, we mainly think of fish, and that's like the primary thing, maybe turtles or whatever. But it's interesting how much the ecosystem, like even if you take a small, I remember we did this at the Ecology Center, you take a little pail of water and it's like all these little microorganisms and all these different things that are so important for the ecosystem. What are some of the things that were affected in this lake that people don't really think of who aren't in tune with aquatic ecosystems?
Well, the entire food web was damaged. Zooplankton, for instance, the little lawnmowers that keep the algae levels down, many of them were extremely sensitive. But it was I think what I learned the most was the microscopic life was so key to the recovery that if we had just dealt with water in an aquarium, it wouldn't have recovered. But the bacteria in the sediments was part of the solution. They started to make use of the sulfur. They started to convert and clean up the lakes the minute the pollution levels were lowered enough. We never had to treat the lakes with limestone or anything. That the microbial world did the heavy lifting of cleaning up the lakes, but every level of science was involved in the study of these lakes, from microscopic zooplankton up to loons. And we learned how, as we always do, how interconnected it all is. But I have to say the focus on fish was actually helpful, because it was the fishery associations that fought hard and tough especially in the U.S. The Canadian Fish and Game Clubs lobbied in Ottawa and also in Washington for clean air in North America. And without those fish groups fighting for their part of the pie, I don't think the whole system would have been dealt with as quickly as it was. So, yes, we notice the fish and public care about the fish, but the system is complex. But in a sense, we got to return the charismatic animals to it to keep the people involved.
Well, that's one of those things, Bill, right? Like when you think about nature finds a way, no matter what. It doesn't matter what man tries to do, it finds a way.
Well, we're talking here, and there's all kinds of examples, but nature is resilient, and if you give it a helping hand, you can accelerate that mitigation process.
Even if you destroy it first.
Yeah, even if you destroy it.
Well, you can't. There are levels you can't go past, and.
So the Living with Lakes Center, we'll get back to Jane in a moment, but world-class environmental research center, it has a green building. And in this quote, to be all together in this inspiring space gives a great sense of cohesion and purpose to the work we do. And of course, you salute the we. But tell us about how that started back. As you said, you started with as a government scientist, but tell us where that name came from and how that all started, because that is a world class, and it all has to do with I think in the regreening effort, not only in Sudbury, but in and around northeastern Ontario, northern Ontario.
No, we started as a cooperative unit, and that was something I learned from when I was a government scientist working representing the province in the United States, is that there were these things called co-op units where government science was in the academic environment to attract students, but also to bring policy information to the university, to keep the ivory tower working on practical matters. And so we created that idea at Laurentian, that we brought Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Natural Resources scientists to the university and created a collaborative space there. And it grew and grew. It was, we were some 60 people squeezed into some rough shacks by about the year 2000. And we realized that to advance into studies of climate change and computer labs, we needed better space. So we hatched the idea of building a world-class green building to be symbolic of the work. And it came together, took 7 years of fundraising, but came together in a building and an idea that putting a multitude of disciplines together in the same building, one shared giant lab, one shared coffee room, very little sense of silos and separation, that we could learn how to manage an ecosystem together. And we were really open to a big tent idea of industry can be part of the solution. And we realized that one of the biggest missing things that we had in our academic world was science communication. We needed to have friends in the community. And so we started a public forum at Science North called Living with Lakes. And the first years we dressed up like Star Trek figures.
What did you dress up as? What was your Star Trek character?
I was Captain Kirk.
Oh, of course you were.
Yes.
But we we brought information to planet Earth and realized that the science communication was what we were particularly good at. And so that eventually grew into the first master's program in science communication, that still the only one in Canada, and that's housed in the Living with Lakes Centre. And then a wise board member said, your place should reflect who you are. So we, even though it was costly, we designed for geothermal and solar and building with wood and then collaboration, and we built a beautiful space that it actually worked.
We often talk about the rhythm of life in North Bay. For Amanda, that rhythm was fast. Hockey practices, baseball games, juggling a full-time career, and keeping up with 2 energetic boys. But life hit pause after routine surgery led to a call she never expected. Stage 2 breast cancer. No symptoms, no warning. Suddenly, Amanda was facing a double mastectomy, reconstruction, weeks of chemotherapy and radiation treatments, and several additional surgeries. The path ahead was overwhelming. Through every stage, one question stayed with her. How do I keep being mom for my boys? Amanda's care team at the North Bay Regional Health Centre made all the difference. They understood how deeply she wanted to hold on to familiar routines, cheering from the stands, being there at bedtime, staying present in the moments that gave her strength. Their compassion kept her connected to the 2 people who kept her fighting. She stayed present, she stayed grounded, she stayed mom. This holiday season, help ensure patients have access to the exceptional care they need during life's most challenging moments. Your gift helps patients like Amanda stay connected to the people they love while strengthening healthcare for families across our region. Visit nbrhcfoundation.ca or call 705-495-8125 to give.
Well, I've been there, and you took me on a tour once, and I'm glad to even with the kerfuffle of the Laurentian University went through, it survived and still survives on. And this science communication, I often say, we know our sports heroes and entertainment people, but we don't know our scientists. And I know Dr. David Pearson, who we hope to have on the Backroads Bill podcast. He's all about science communication, and you've referenced that master's program. But it takes us back to Jane Goodall, because what are the plans now to salute Jane? Because I think that's going to be the next challenge to do so, because she did so much, as you said earlier in the podcast, about saluting Sudbury and all its efforts with regards to the regreening and all these other sidebar things that have occurred over 50 years and plus.
Yeah, we want to be bold and let Jane speak for us now. She worked in 50 or more countries. She probably spoke in 70 countries, but I think she chose Sudbury as her national center. And we are in turn considering having a national heritage site to hope, the reasons for hope, and let Jane Goodall tell the story in art and music and other ways here. Jane came to Sudbury, I think, about 8 different times. She was on her way back before she died to give one last lecture. And she loved the story that Sudbury tells, but she was also very determined that you have to act on her behalf. And so we looked at ourselves that she always had 4 reasons for hope. The first was the human intellect, that we're smarter than chimps. So we saw that that's where she gave her first lecture at Laurentian University, and the Peregrine Falcon is now going to be a sculpture in recognition of Jane. It'll actually be mounted on a shatter cone, the origin stone for Sudbury of its wealth and problems and solutions. And then the next one was the resilience of nature, and she told that story most often. And that as you come into Sudbury, we're thinking we're going to have something equivalent to the Terry Fox Memorial Visitor Center, where you would arrive at the Jane Goodall Reclamation Trail in Coniston, and you'd be able to do what she did so proudly and writes about, that you would walk and see the Black Hill side by side with the Green Hill that was treated, so that the history of regreening is revealed there. And at that site, you would learn that there are 3 other sites, the one I mentioned at the university, where other messages are to be found. But she would be telling us at that site that the job is not finished, and the community would have to, you wouldn't be allowed to unveil anything unless you promised to do something. And you'd have to finish the regreening work, and you'd have to support youth programs. So that moves us to the Fish Festival that's happening on May the 9th. And that's her third reason for hope, the dedication of youth, the power of youth. And we've got some really powerful young people in Sudbury that speak nationally. So Jane believed that each child can have a voice, and so we're going to recognize something special at the festival on May the 9th. We're going to have a traveling exhibit of a sculpture with a bucket and fish going into the creek, and it'll go into schools and celebrate Jane's educational message. And finally, the big site, where maybe more than 250,000 people a year will come and see it, is the site where we dare to imagine an actual life-size sculpture of Jane herself, sitting on a log with one child at a time, sitting beside the solar system display. I've even spoken to Art McDonald, our Nobel laureate. He'd be happy to contribute an inspirational note there. And at that spot, Jane is speaking about the indomitable spirit of humans. And there are many at that view right beside the boardwalk, and it's part of the Trans-Canada Trail. And it'll look at a drinking water lake in the middle of an industrial city and say, that's not possible. And it was. She'll look across the hill to a cancer research center, and that's not possible, but it is. She'll look across to the superstack coming down and being replaced with now that there's only 2% of the pollution and a thriving industry. She'll say that's not possible, but it is. And kids will learn those messages. And it will be linked to school programs and teachers that will encourage what Jane wanted them to do. Is right in front of that site is a restored wetland. And just down the trail is the spot where the Prime Minister and Jane and Stephen Guilbeault planted the 10 million trees. So she, maybe with sound and music and motion detectors, will be encouraging kids to get up and experience nature. So we're viewing the 4 sites as linked by art and messaging, and I'm hoping there's some donors listening today, because I just discovered, like science, art is quite expensive to do as well, and we want to support local artists in this project. So we've got a good start on it. We've got the first 2 sites, the university and the fish site, pretty well figured out and supported, and now we're going for the 2 big sites, Science North, and then we're going to have to meet with the federal and provincial people of, can we deserve to be a national heritage site, and can we start to call ourselves the regreening city of hope for Canada.
Yeah, and that is quite a process. I know a little bit about it, and it takes a long time. And you've got the players, so to speak, and of course Jane, her being in the foreground, in the background. And when I was just sitting here listening to everything you said, and I thought, out of bad comes good. when you think about it. I was trying to summarize it, and that's the only thing that popped into my head when you think about, the roasting pits and how it all started, and then more than 50 years of effort by the community and so many people in the community, including industry, government, and all the people, the academic people, and the people from the community in general. It's a story of, I think, commitment and emotion as well. Out of bad comes good.
It sure is, and we're in such a dark period, and kids are suffering the anxiety of climate change, and all I think I can offer is that we had the worst of the worst, and it was in the acid rain era and the metal contamination, and if you can show that what was once called a moonscape is now called the Regreening City of Hope, or the City of Lakes is another name that we use for ourselves. Like, that happens in a lifetime, but it requires action, and that's all we can offer now is a beautiful example that can give kids hope, and I hope the world will respond.
When we had Peter Beckett and Sarah Woods on, they were talking about this, that, in my lifetime, I've lived my entire life in Northern Ontario. And for others, just driving from the east or the west, and you look at you could see the exposed bedrock in many places, as you would in any place in Northern Ontario, but you look at all the trees. So for newcomers, and I whether they be immigrants or just tourists, you might not even think of this story. That's why sometimes I think I like this idea of this national heritage site and this hope business, because those should be on the signs coming into Sudbury from all directions.
Yeah. No, you have to have the pictures or the words to go with it. That I think the pictures are so sharp and stark when you go black to green. The lake story, I'm the water end of it, is a little harder to tell, but things like the return of loons, the return of kids out there fishing in lakes that was impossible before. You can do that in image and social media as well. So I think we want people to get a surprise when they arrive in Sudbury that this can't be, and then show them how it did happen.
I don't know if there's any examples, John, around the world where, we could talk about the connectivity with Jane, but I was just thinking, is there any other places in the world where this has happened? And then, of course, the success story comes along. We're talking about contemporary times, and we could look back centuries and centuries, but we fast forward. Are there any other examples that come to your mind about and again, these are new plans, kind of with the passing of Jane, but after 50 years and more and the efforts still are ongoing. But is there any other places like that you can think of?
Well, I think big stories like, the return of wildlife to Yellowstone or to Chernobyl, or devastated landscapes, major investments in rock quarry areas and that. But there are a lot of stark before and after stories that are equivalent, but we were the biggest. We were the largest point source of sulfur pollution in the world. Sudbury at its height was producing more sulfur than all of industrial Europe does today, more than 3 times what Japan produces today. And the scale of the land reclamation needs were among the largest in the world. 7,000 acid-damaged lakes. When I presented this story at the UN COP15 meeting in Montreal, I made note to of the countries of the world that were there that the Sudbury impact zone, 17,000 square kilometers from Killarney up to Temagami and Temiskaming, was bigger than 40 countries on Earth. That our one little damage zone is not one little damage zone. It's a global project. And And when you compare our 7,000 damaged lakes, that's rivaling the damage that happened in Sweden and Norway. So we were a big deal. And the story, and Jane recognized that. But you're right, as soon as you can't see it or smell it anymore, a new generation will not remember it. So I think it's like some of the horrors of the past. We can't forget them. We shouldn't celebrate the damage, but we have to show people that it happened, and it's possible to repair. Because when I started out, not only were people saying irreversible damage, but it's the cost of industry. You just have to accept it. And I also grew up in Sydney, Cape Breton, in the tar ponds area, and we had the same. So I've lived in the two dirtiest parts of Canada, and both of them are restored.
Yeah, it's interesting, listening to you guys talk about this, because, Jane Goodall, it's so interesting how she's this global figure. I remember, I think it was, it was like, when I was in high school, you took psychology, but it was like psychology / sociology / anthropology. Obviously in the anthropology one, that's kind of where you hear her name the most. And it's kind of neat because Sudbury, in the grand scheme of the world, is kind of this small place. I know it's triple the size of North Bay, but it's still a relatively small city in Canada, which is a very vast land that we live in this country. And so for her to pick out this one spot, and obviously the work that's gone into it is incredible. So it's good. It's always nice to hear the stories, even if they're a rival city. It's always nice to hear the stories of that going in, because I do remember growing up in the early 2000s, where there was still a lot of the regreening was happening, and people were talking about the super stack, and they were talking like it wasn't in the same place that it is today, and it's great to see it come back. One of the things you said a couple of times in this episode was Science North, and we talked to Frank Marietti.
Yep.
And we had the pleasure of speaking to him. And if you know me, I love Science. It's one of my favorite places ever.
Oh, it's great.
I love Science North, and so you've obviously are well acquainted with it. I wanted to ask you what your favorite Science North thing is, whether it's an exhibit or it was a movie that played, just something about Science North, maybe a memory that is like, this is the thing that stands out when I think of it.
Well, selfishly, it was I took part in the IMAX movie with Jane Goodall, and I think the movie production that they've done is quite incredible. The quality of the IMAX films that come out of Science North are quite amazing, and I think for my own kids, the underground experience of Dynamic Earth is something they always remember. Dave Pearson was the founding director, and his idea around direct contact with staff, the Blue Coat idea of having young people learning to be scientists while educating others as high school kids. So it's I've been to lots of science centers around the world, and I think Science North is one of the best in the world at doing what they do. And this Jane Goodall celebration at Science North will only enhance that, because she will draw attention to even the infrastructure, the solar panels, the lighting, their environmental standards. It'll be a major tourist draw now that the Toronto Science Centre is got quashed. It's the largest and most frequently attended science centre in Ontario now. So I really like. I think Jane would be particularly proud of how they used the power of film to get her message out, and that was the role that she played there. But she also wanted everyone to take part in the Roots and Shoots conferences that Franco Mariotti hosted at Science North, and And that organization is very powerful throughout the world. We're, I hate to reveal it before we know it, but if we can get the sculpture and the science project finished, or our deadline is spring of 2027 to be completed, I'd love to have her grandchildren come to unveil it from Tanzania. And I think they would be proud to see the legacy that their grandmother left in Canada in the work that we do.
Yeah, and I was just going to say about the IMAX quickly is you have to remember too with the IMAX, it was really one of its first of its kind. Like you didn't have the home theater experience you have today, and you didn't, even the cinemas were not at the level. The IMAX, it was mind blowing as a kid. And the one thing that, going back to Science North, and I'll forever love Science North because it makes learning as a kid fun. Kind of like the Ecology Center does the same thing. It's hands-on, where when you're in a classroom, when you're a kid, kind of boring, especially when it's like chemistry class and it's like, or physics class, kind of boring. So I always appreciate teachers who do fun experiments, show like what does it look like, even in chemistry, if you show a chemical reaction happening in real time, something that kind of gets people more involved. And I think that's what Science North does great. And I know this isn't a Science North episode, but as soon as you said that, I had to bring that up because it is, it's a very core memory for me from my youth. We used to go there every March break, actually. Used to take a trip there.
My grandchildren in the basement are wondering, when are we going over to Science North? They live in Toronto.
Yeah, and there you go. Like, thankfully, we're only an hour and 20 minutes, but that used to always be a fun trip. I remember the waterfall that would come down kind of near the opening, and I can still remember 90% of the halls walking through the giant, what was it, the dinosaur that was hanging down in the. Anyways, I could talk about that forever, but Bill, I know you have maybe a couple more burning questions.
Well, it's not often we get to speak with someone that's a friend of Jane Goodall, and as we continue our talk here, John, that by circumstance, you're one of the many actors on an environmental stage that again, this whole aspect, I should say, of a success story. How do you feel about that, being part of that with many other people, mind you, but just and all those years that go by and your whole lifetime in Sudbury, and you see this and you feel it. What's your takeaway with all this?
Well, I very honored to be. I have to say, I do sense the responsibility to tell the story as a result. Is that those days of spending in boats and canoes with Jane Goodall, talking about grandchildren and spiders and how we should treat fish and all that. It was. She put a lot of determination into the rest of us that if she wasn't going to let up on and never take a break from her work, neither should we. And I think that's the sort of that's why we're doing not this kind of a dedication project to Jane, but call to action site in Sudbury to Jane. And if we can raise funds for these projects and keep the youth programs going, I think that's what she expects of us. So in her last year of life, I had several personal emails about issues and jokes and carrying on, and I think we were very good friends in the end. That she saw in the work that we each do real value.
Yeah, I'm going to look forward to 2027 and whatever number of celebrations you have in the city of Greater Sudbury. And it has been a privilege to have you on the Backroads Bill podcast, because you, along with Jane and many others, are true friends of nature. And I think that's a good way to end actually 2025. This is going to be airing with the first show.
It'll be next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. So
yeah, the 31st. It's New Year's Eve for those watching.
Yeah, really good messages. Thanks, John.
Well, the next year is the 30th year of her visit to Sudbury.
There you go.
There you go.
Perfect timing.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, guys.
So a big thank you to Dr. John Gunn for coming on and talking some science, the environmental impact, Jane Goodall, all of that stuff. It was a really cool conversation. Again, you see this influence that Jane Goodall had on Canada, more specifically Sudbury. And you really can see how Sudbury is a story of influence and resilience. And it's really neat to see. And then, of course, obviously talking Science North is always going to be a 10 out of 10 for me. Anytime we can talk Science North, always a good time for me personally. And I hope you guys enjoyed the episode because it was a blast to be able to record. So if you enjoyed this episode, you can find new episodes of the Backroads Bill podcast every single Wednesday, including next Wednesday, where we get our first episode of 2026, where we're going to be going out of our way to discover probably the coolest school in the world, or at least in Ontario, probably Canada. It's got a chocolate factory inside of it. That's what I'll say. It's really neat. That's going to be our first episode of 2026. Super excited to get that going, and you'll see that in just about a week's time. So keep your eye out. You can find this podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple's Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, etc. The video version on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel, and everything, audio, video, etc., northbayecho.ca, which is the place to be. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next year in about a week. That joke's always my favorite. We'll see you next year here on the Backroads Bill podcast. Thank you for spending your 2025 with us, whether this is your first time listening or you've been a long time listener. We appreciate it, and we can't wait to see what's in store for this podcast next year. So as always, thank you again, and we'll see you again next week for another Backroads adventure.